So one of the biggest claims Islam makes is that Jesus never died on the cross, that Allah swapped him out in the last second and somebody else took the nails. Here's the problem with that. Not even atheists agree with them. Think of it this way. Everything, and I mean everything, hangs on that cross. No cross, no resurrection. No resurrection, no gospel. Paul said it himself in 1 Corinthians 15. If Christ has not been raised, our faith is useless, and we're still in our sins. So the enemy doesn't need to disprove God. He doesn't need to argue Jesus never existed. He just needs to pull one nail. One. And that's exactly where Islam aims. The Quran doesn't call Jesus a liar. It doesn't call him a bad man. It honors him as a prophet. It calls him the Messiah, born of a virgin, a worker of miracles. But it takes the single load-bearing event of all human history, the death of the Son of God, and it says it never happened. An illusion. A trick of the eye. So today we run an investigation. One standard of evidence, the exact same test a courtroom would use on the death of any in history. No special pleading for our side, no special pleading for theirs, just the evidence, weighed honestly in the open. And by the end of this briefing, you'll have 4 tactical bullets loaded and ready, 4 pieces of evidence you can fire the next time somebody hands you this argument. And then I'm going to do something extra. I'm going to show you the 3 comebacks as a trained Muslim apologist will throw at you after you fire those bullets, and how to answer every one of them. So you're not just going to have the opening move, you're ready for the whole exchange. Guys, I'm going to break down exactly what the Quran claims, what history actually records, and why the gap between the two is a problem Islam can't solve. Let's get into it. Now, before we fire a single shot, we put their best case on the table, because if we can't state our opponent's argument accurately, honestly, the way they would state it, then we have no business answering it. A cheap shot at a weak version of their argument convinces nobody. So let's be fair. Surah 4 verse 157. The Quran, speaking of the Jews, says, quote, "They did not kill him, nor did they crucify him, but it was made to appear so to them." Made to appear so. Shubha laham in the Arabic. It was made to seem that way. That's the claim. The crucifixion was a real looking event, but the actual death of Jesus did not happen. Now here's something that most people don't realize. The Quran itself doesn't explain how. It gives you the denial in a single verse and then moves on. It doesn't say who is on the cross. It doesn't say what happened to Jesus instead. That silence is important. We'll come back to it. But because the Quran left the gap, Islamic scholars spent the next several centuries trying to fill it in. And they landed on 2 main theories. Theory 1, the substitution theory. This is the majority view in Islamic tradition. Allah rescued Jesus, raised him up to heaven alive, and put another man on that cross in his place. A man supernaturally made to look exactly like him. So the disciples, the Romans, the crowd, everybody, and I mean everybody, thought they were watching Jesus die. But it was a double. Now who's the double? The traditions don't agree. Some say it was Simon of Cyrene, the man who carried the cross. Some say it was Judas Iscariot, a kind of poetic justice. The betrayer takes the betrayed's place. Some say a random disciple volunteered. They cannot agree on the substitute's identity. Hold that thought. Theory 2, the swoon theory. This one says Jesus was generally put to the cross, but he never actually died there. He passed out. He swooned. He fell into a coma so deep that everyone believed he was dead. Then he was taken down, still alive, and later he recovered. That's the case. 2 theories, 1 verse, 1 conclusion. Jesus did not die on that cross. We've stated it fairly. We've stated the way an honest Muslim would state it. Now, here's a tactical response. Here's how we're going to run this, the same way a court establishes any historical fact. Hostile witnesses, physical evidence, and the consensus of the experts who examine the case. And watch what I'm about to do, because this is the whole key. I'm not going to lean on Christian sources to prove a Christian claim. If I stood here and said the crucifixion is true because Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John said so, a skeptic would be right to call that circular. You can't prove the gospel with the gospel, not in this argument. So we're going to build this entire case using non-Christian witnesses. People with no reason on earth to help the church. Roman pagans who despised Christianity. A Jewish historian working for the empire. A Greek satirist whose whole career was mocking Christians, and then modern scholars who flatly reject the resurrection, who do not believe Jesus is God, who would love nothing more than to debunk the whole thing. And here's the principle. If even the hostile witnesses, the people who want us to be wrong, are forced to admit Jesus died, then the case is closed before we even open a Bible. That's not faith, that's evidence. Let's call the first witness. Take Tacitus, Roman senator and historian, writing around 116 AD. No friend of Christianity, he called it the most mischievous superstition. This is a man who looked down on Christians, and in his Annals, Book 15, recording the Great Fire of Rome under Nero, he explains who Nero blamed. Quote, Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our proctators, Pontius Pilate. Stop and look what just happened. A hostile Roman historian in the official imperial record gives you 4 facts. A man called Christ executed. The extreme penalty. That's Roman legal language for capital execution. Under Tiberius by Pontius Pilate. That's the crucifixion, confirmed by a pagan who's despised the faith. He's not trying to help us. He's explaining a fire, and in that explaining, he nails down the death. Now take Josephus, Jewish historian, born in Jerusalem working under Roman patronage, writing in the 90s AD. In his Antiquities of the Jews, he writes that Pilate, upon hearing him accused by men of the highest standing among us, had condemned him to be crucified. A Jewish source, not a Christian one, and he says it plainly, condemned to be crucified. Now scholars debate whether later Christian scribes embellished parts of that passage, and that's fair. But even the most skeptical scholars agree to the core of it. The crucifixion under Pilate is authentic to Josephus. The death survives on a scholarly filter. But I'm not just going to give you 2. Let me give you 2 more that most people have never even heard of, because I want this firing line to be undeniable. Marabel Serapion, a Syrian Stoic philosopher, writing a letter to his son from a Roman prison, somewhere after 70 AD. He's not a Christian. He's making a philosophical point of what happens to nations that execute their wise men. And he lists 3. The Athenians who killed Socrates, the people of Samos who burned Pythagoras, and the Jews who executed, quote, their wise king. He says after the execution the Jews were driven from their kingdom and scattered. He's referencing the death of Jesus as a known historical event, decades after the fact, to make a point that has nothing to do with promoting Christianity. And then the Babylonian Talmud, a Jewish source hostile to the Christian claim. Sanhedrin 43a records that on the eve of Passover, Yeshu was hanged, which in that period is a term used for crucifixion, being hung on a tree. A Jewish religious text with every reason to deny the Christian story confirms the execution and even places it at Passover, exactly where the Gospels place it. So now count them. A Roman senator, a Jewish historian, a Syrian Stoic, the Jewish Talmud, 4 hostile witnesses, 4 different cultures, 4 different agendas, and not one of them is trying to help the church. And all 4 independently confirm this man was executed. It's not a contradiction, that's history. And here's the question that should land like a hammer. The Quran was written in the 7th century, 600 years after those men who wrote. So who has the better seat in the courtroom? The witnesses writing within living memory, on the same continent, in the same generations as the event? Or a book written 6 centuries downstream, in a different language, on a different continent, by a man who was never even there? In any court on earth, the closer witness wins. It isn't even close. Let me stop right here because this matters more than the argument. If you're watching this and realizing you could not have answered that an hour ago, that you'd been standing there empty-handed if a coworker or family member hit you with Sirah 4157, that right there is the entire mission of this channel. We're not here to win an internet fight. We're here to make sure when somebody challenges your faith, you're ready, armed, trained. 1 Peter 3:15, always be ready to give a reason for the hope that's in you. We're pushing hard for 500 subscribers. If this is sharpening you, hit that subscribe button right now and stand with us. We're almost to the objective, and every single one of you counts. Now, bullet 2, and this one gets physical. Guys, it's going to be kind of tough to hear, but you need to hear it. The Swoon theory says Jesus just passed out, that he survived the cross and woke up later. Let's put that body under the medical light, because modern medicine absolutely demolishes it. Start with this. Roman crucifixion was not improvised. It was an engineered execution, refined over centuries, designed to do exactly one thing: kill a human being as slowly, as publicly, and as certainly as possible. The Romans were the most efficient executioners the ancient world's ever produced. The idea that their signature method of death accidentally let a man slip through alive, it's not history. That's wishful thinking dressed up as a theory. Let's not stay general. Let's walk the actual medical sequence, because in 1986, the Journal of American Medical Association published a detailed study on exactly this, the physiology of the death of Jesus, and it lines up precisely with the gospel account. It starts before the cross. Jesus is scourged, a Roman flogging with a whip woven through with bone and metal that tore the flesh off a man's back. The blood loss alone from the scourging put victims in an early hypovolemic shock. Men died from the scourging before they ever even reached the cross. Then the nails, driven not through the palms of tear, but through the wrist, severing the median nerve, an agony so extreme the Romans coined a word for it, excruciating, literally out of the cross. And then the body hangs. And here's the killing mechanism, the part of the swoon theory that can't survive. On a cross, you don't die from the wounds, you die from asphyxiation. Hanging by the arms, the chest is locked in the inhale position. To breathe out, the victim has to push up on those nailed feet, straightening the legs, dragging the torn back against the wood just to exhale one breath. Push up, exhale, sink down, suffocate, over and over, for hours, until the body simply cannot push anymore. Then you suffocate. That's the design. Now watch the gospel detail. John 19. The soldiers came to break the legs of the men being crucified, and we know why now. Break the legs and the man can no longer push up to breathe. He asphyxiates in minutes. They broke the legs of the two thieves, but when they came to Jesus, John 19:33 records, they found he was already dead. So they did not break his legs, they did not need to. The execution squad, the professional killers, examined him and certified the death. And then the final confirmation. John 19:34 reads, to be certain, a soldier drives a spear into his side, and immediately blood and water came out. Blood and water. Modern medicine recognizes that as a separation of clotted blood and watery serum. Pericardial and pleural fluid, the kind of fluid buildup you find in the body that's already died, often from cardiac and respiratory collapse. A first-century fisherman named John is not inventing a clinical detail he couldn't possibly have understood. He's reporting what he saw with his own eyes, and what he saw was a corpse. One more thing, the detail that closes the door completely, under Roman law, if a condemned man came down off that cross alive, the soldiers assigned him were executed in his place. Their own lives were on the line. So I ask you this, is a Roman execution squad with a death sentence hanging over their own heads, if they get it wrong, going to sign off on a death they didn't actually finish? Not a chance. Not a chance on earth. These men were certain. Their lives depended on being certain. That's not a contradiction. That's history. So that's 2 bullets fired, the hostile witnesses, the medical reality. And here's where it gets interesting, because now I'm going to bring in the experts. And you expect Christian scholars to affirm crucifixion. Of course they do. That proves nothing to a skeptic. So we're not calling them. We're going to the other side of the courtroom, the hostile scholars. The ones who do not believe Jesus rose, who do not believe he's God, and who still cannot deny he died. Stay locked in, because this is where the case becomes a blowout. Bart Ehrman, one of the most famous skeptical New Testament scholars alive on the planet, an agnostic, a man who spent his entire career writing best-selling books against Orthodox Christianity. And here's what Ehrman says, quote, the crucifixion of Jesus by the Romans is one of the most secure facts we have about his life. One of the most secure facts we have. From a man who did not believe Jesus rose from the dead. Read that again and let it sink in. The skeptic isn't disputing the death. The skeptic is conceding it had a bedrock. And it's not just Ehrman. Gerd Lüdemann, a German New Testament scholar, an outright atheist, stated that the death of Jesus by crucifixion is indisputable. John Dominic Crossan, co-founder of the Jesus Seminar, one of the most theologically liberal scholars of the last century, a man who denies almost everything supernatural in the Gospels, even he wrote that the crucifixion of Jesus is as sure as anything historically that can ever be. That's a radical skeptic saying it's as certain as history gets. This is what scholars call the minimal facts approach. You set aside everything that's debated and you stand on only what the near universal consensus of historians, Christian, atheists, Jewish, and agnostics will grant. And the death of Jesus by crucifixion under Pontius Pilate is at the very top of that list. It is, in the language of the field, virtually undisputed across the entire scholarly spectrum. Now hold that up against the substitution theory. Where's the evidence for it? Where's the first century document that says a stand-in died? Where's the hostile witnesses who says I saw them grab a substitute? There isn't one. There's not a single contemporary source for the substitution. The idea doesn't appear anywhere in history until the Quran, 600 years downstream, and then it gets filled in later by traditions that, remember, contradict each other about who the substitute even was. Simon, Judas, a volunteer. They can't agree because there was never an evidence to begin with. They're guessing at the details of an event that historical record says never even happened that way. Think of it like a courtroom one more time. On one side of the bench, Roman records, Jewish records, a Syrian letter, the Talmud, and the unanimous verdict of modern historians, including the atheists, including the men who would love to rule the other way. On the other side, a single claim, written 6 centuries later, with zero contemporary evidence, no internal agreement of the basic facts, no judge on earth rules for side 2. The evidence isn't close. It's a blowout. That's 3 bullets down, and now the 4th. And this is the one that's going to give you chills. Everything we've covered so far proves that death is history. This last bullet proves it was the plan, because the cross wasn't an accident God had to clean up. It was written into the script centuries in advance. Let's start with Isaiah 53, written by most generous skeptical dating anyone offers, centuries before Jesus was ever born. And we can prove that, because we found it in the ground. The Dead Sea Scrolls include a complete scroll of Isaiah that predates Christ by at least 100 years. So nobody can claim the church wrote this after the fact and slipped it in. It was already there, buried in a cave, waiting. And listen to what it says about the suffering servant. He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Pierced, crushed. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before his shearers is silent. So he did not open his mouth. Silent before his accusers. Exactly what the Gospels record at the trial when Jesus stood before Pilate and gave no answer. He was assigned a grave with the wicked, though he had done no violence. Executed in the company of criminals, 2 thieves, one on his right, one on his left. And then this, verse 11. After he has suffered, he will see the light of life, death, and then life, on the far side of it. Now I'm going to give you a second prophecy because the 2 fingerprints are harder to dismiss than one. Psalm 22, written by David roughly 1,000 years before Christ, and centuries before crucifixion was even invented as a method of execution. The Romans didn't develop it until much later, and yet David writes, verse 16, "They have pierced my hands and my feet." Pierced hands and feet, describing the mechanics of a death that didn't exist yet when the words were written. And verse 18, "They divide my clothes among them and cast lots for my garment." Now open John 19:24. The Roman soldiers at the foot of the cross dividing Jesus' clothing and casting lots for his seamless robe. A 1,000-year-old psalm describing the soldiers' gambling game fulfilled to the detail. So here's a question that ends this section. If the crucifixion was an illusion, if nobody really died, if it was all Shubha Lahim, made to appear, then what on earth do we do with the 2 documents, written centuries before and a millennium beforehand, that describes the piercing, the silence, the grave with the wicked, the gambling for the garments, and the life to come after suffering? Illusions don't fulfill prophecy. Phantoms don't describe 1,000 years in advance. Only real events do. The cross wasn't a mistake the Romans made and the Quran later corrected 600 years on. It was written into the plan before crucifixion was even invented. That's not a contradiction. That's history, with God's signature on it. Now here's what separates a trained believer from someone who just memorized 4 facts. When you fire those 4 bullets at a skilled Muslim apologist, he's not going to fold. He's going to have 3 comebacks ready. So let me arm you against all 3 right now, so nothing catches you off guard. Comeback 1. The Gospels were corrupted. You can't trust them. This is the most common counter, and watch how it backfires. First, every bullet I just gave you came from non-Christian sources. Tacitus, Josephus, the Talmud, the skeptical scholars. None of those are the Gospels. So even if you threw the New Testament in the trash, the crucifixion still stands on hostile evidence alone. But here's a deeper problem for them, and this is a trap door. We'll spring it fully in part 2. The Quran itself tells Christians to trust the Gospel, so they cannot call it corrupt without breaking their own book. Hold that thought. Comeback 2. Your sources are too late. Tacitus wrote almost a century after. Turn the standard around. If 80-some years is too late to trust Tacitus, a Roman senator with access to imperial archives, writing within the living memory, then what does that make the Quran, written 600 years after the event, on another continent, in another language, with no chain witnesses at all? You can't disqualify a witnessing writing 80 years out and then accept one writing 600 years out. That's not a standard. That's a double standard. Name the tactic. It's special pleading. Call it out. Comeback 3, the Swoon variant. He survived and the disciples nursed him back. Send him back to the medical evidence. A man who's been scourged to the point of shock, asphyxiated on a cross for hours, certified death by professional executioners whose own lives were on the line, and speared through the chest cavity? That man doesn't recover in a sealed tomb with no food or water and no medical care, then single-handedly rolls away a 1 to 2 ton stone. Overpower the Roman guard and convince hundreds of people he's the risen Lord of life. The Swoon theory doesn't end in a resurrection. It ends with a corpse in a tomb. 3 comebacks, 3 answers. Now you're not just ready for the opening shot. You're ready for the whole firefight. That's constant display. You don't just know the truth, you know how to hold the line when it's tested. So here's the part nobody says out loud. Why does Islam deny the cross in the first place? Because once you understand the why, the whole thing makes sense. The Quran's denial of the cross was never a historical finding. Nobody in the 7th century dug up new evidence. It was a theological necessity. Here's the logic. Islam teaches that a true prophet of Allah cannot be abandoned, defeated, and shamefully executed by his enemies, because that would mean Allah failed to protect his messenger. A crucified prophet in the Islamic framework is a contradiction in terms. So when Islam looked at the cross, it faced a choice: accept the single most well-documented death in all ancient history, or protect the theology by denying the event. It chose to deny the evidence to save the system. And Christianity does the exact opposite. We don't run from the cross, we preach it. We put it on our buildings, we wear it around our necks, because in our story the death was never a defeat, it was the mission. It is finished. The shame was the point. The Son of God stepped into the penalty that was ours to pay, and he paid it in full, in public, on the record. So look at the two faced side by side. One had to erase the cross to survive. The other was built on it, out in the open, daring the whole world to investigate. And that tells you something about which one is afraid of evidence. We're not afraid of it. We run towards it. But here's what should stop you absolutely cold, and this is exactly where we go on Friday. The Quran tells Christians directly in its own text to settle disputes by checking the gospel. Surah 10, verse 94. If you are in doubt by what we have revealed to you, then ask those who have been reading the scriptures before you. Surah 5, verse 47. Let the people of the gospel judge by what Allah has revealed in it. So the Quran itself sends us to the gospel as a standard of truth. Fine, let's do exactly what it commands. Let's open the gospel. But the moment we open it, the very gospel the Quran told us to trust, it says Jesus died on the cross and rose 3 days later, which directly contradicts the Quran. And now there's a problem, a self-defeating loop. Because if the gospel is reliable, then the Quran is wrong about the cross. And if the gospel is corrupted, then why on earth did the Quran command Christians to trust it and judge by it anyways? Either way, the Quran breaks. They call this an Islamic dilemma. And Friday, in part 2, we're going to walk straight into the center of it and show you why it cannot be escaped. Every exit is sealed. And then I'm going to show you how to deliver that checkmate with mercy. Because the goal was never to win an argument and humiliate a man. The goal was always to win a soul. And there's a way to hold the truth like a sword and still extend it like a hand. That's Friday. So there's your briefing, 4 bullets, loaded and confirmed. The hostile witnesses, a Roman, a Jew, a Syrian, and a Talmud. The medical reality, Rome did not fail, and the spear sealed it. The scholarly verdict, even the atheists call it certain. And the prophetic fingerprint, pierced hands in a divided garment, written 1,000 years in advance, plus 3 comebacks countered. So you're ready for the whole exchange. The next time someone tells you Jesus never died on that cross, you don't flinch, you don't get loud, you open the case file, because the cross is the single most well-evidenced death in ancient history. That's not faith reaching for something, that's the record speaking for itself. Guys, subscribe now, sharpen your sword. Part 2, the Islamic Dilemma, drops Friday at 7. Don't miss it. That's the one they don't want you to see.
Objective received. Moving to extract.